I tasted humiliation the second she slapped that red notice on my door. She called me a tenant, waving bylaws like scripture until the deed sliced her story in half. Her pearls gleamed. My folder gleamed louder. Let me take you back. The coffee was still hot when I sat down on my uncle's porch chair. The wood creaked the way it always had a sound that reminded me of summers gone of evenings when the lake mist curled through the pines like smoke. For a few seconds I thought the morning would hold steady quiet safe. Then the doorbell jolted the air. It wasn't a polite press, it was a hammering a demand. I set the mug down, watching steam rise, and walked to the door. On the other side stood Karen Carmichael, pearls flashing against her tan clipboard hugged to her chest like scripture. She didn't bother with good morning. She leaned in, the perfume sharp, and thrust a folder toward me. "These are the bylaws," she said. "You're listed as a tenant. Tenants are subject to HOA fees and penalties. You'll want to review Section 3.4. I blinked at her. Tenant. The word landed like grit in my mouth. My uncle left me this cabin in his will. I'd spent the last year learning to live alone in it, nursing coffee on this porch, trying to keep my grief from seeping into the floorboards. But she wasn't interested in explanations. From the back pocket of her clipboard, she pulled a red slip of paper. Bold letters already catching the sunlight. Without asking, she pressed it against the doorframe with a strip of tape, the slap of paper sharp against the wood. "Notice of violation," it read. Behind her, her SUV idled in the gravel, its headlights winking, engine purring like it had more authority than I did. I asked, "And what exactly am I violating?" Karen smiled thinly. "Unauthorized occupancy. Fees delinquent. If you want to contest, you'll need to appear at the board meeting. Otherwise, we expect payment by the 15th. Her pearls caught the sun again when she tilted her chin as though this was a coronation. The lake air turned heavier. Across the narrow road, blinds shifted. Mrs. Landry's dachshund barked once silenced quickly. My neighbor, 2 doors down, lifted his coffee mug to his lips, staring over the rim, making sure he didn't miss anything. Gossip was already unfurling, weaving between windows and porches faster than the mist could rise. I tried to hold steady. My uncle's study still had boxes of his old files, deeds, utility stubs, even yellowed correspondence with the county clerk. I hadn't touched them. Grief made dust feel sacred. Now those boxes felt like they were humming, suddenly urgent, waiting to be called back into service. Karen tapped the clipboard once more. Tenant, she repeated the word sharp like it gave her pleasure. I pressed my palm against the doorframe over the red slip. The wood was warm, and I could feel the nails beneath, steady from decades of storms. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You've knocked on the wrong door." For a flicker, her smile cracked. She straightened, clicked her pen closed, and walked back toward her SUV, heels biting the gravel. The door slammed, the engine growled, and she pulled away, leaving a red slash of paper behind. I returned to the porch. The chair groaned as I sat, familiar and intact. My coffee had cooled into bitterness, but I raised it anyway. The notice fluttered in the breeze, taunting scarlet against the cedar siding. The lake mist was gone, burned away by the sun, and I sat staring at that notice until the edges curled. By Friday, the little brass mailbox at the end of my drive had developed a wheeze. Every time I opened the lid, envelopes sprang like coiled snakes, white cream, pale gray, each stamped with some officious crest, each window flashing my name as if on a wanted poster. I carried the stack inside with both hands, set it on the oak table, and watched it slide to one side under its own weight. The house smelled of cedar and coffee, and a little of lake water that always found its way into the boards. I told myself I'd open just one. 1 became 3. 3 became a heap of unfolded paper corners overlapping like shingles. "Notice of violation," said the first. "Improper trash placement," said the second, though my bins had lived in the same tucked corner since I moved in. "Lawn non-compliance," said the third, and I could almost hear my old mower laugh from the garage. The language was precise, like a needle. "Immediate payment required. Escalating penalties." A paragraph in small print warned of lien action, the letters leaning into each other like they had a secret I wasn't meant to hear. I made coffee I didn't want. The mug left a damp ring on a letter about my mailbox angle. Apparently it tilted 2 degrees too friendly toward the road. Outside, a car passed slow enough for me to know it was looking, and not just at the view. Neighbors waved without meeting my eye. A garden hose hissed to a stop when I stepped onto the porch. Somewhere, a screen door clicked shut and stayed that way. Next day, a thicker envelope came cream paper with an embossed return. The kind of stationery people use to invite you to a wedding or a reprimand. I slit it with my uncle's pocket knife. Special Assessment Memo, the header. Declared all caps sober and clean. In the second paragraph, due to unanticipated legal expenses required to preserve community standards. The number at the bottom was not small. I could almost feel the neighborhood doing the math. If he'd just pay and fall in line, none of us would be hit with this. I set the memo aside. The driveway gravel crunched. A couple out for a walk slowed in front of the cabin. She kept her eyes on the dog. He stared at his shoes and then at the red notice still taped to my door, now curled at the corners, the tape straining. They moved on faster than they'd arrived, the way people leave a hospital room when the machines start making new noises. The table was a mess. My uncle would have scolded me for working in the open like that. He preferred a desk drawers labeled tabs in tidy rows. I carried everything to the study and closed the door. The lamp threw a small circle of light the rest of the room in comfortable shadow. Dust lifted from the old file boxes like breath. I started reading. At first, the bylaws were a fog of sections and subsections, the kind of writing that hides its intentions in grammar. I read anyway, pencil in hand. Coffee turned cool and then cold. Outside, the lake swapped afternoon shimmer for slate. The ceiling fan above me ticked once every few seconds, a metronome for patience. They fined me for trash placement. I found the section containers not visible from street except on collection day. My containers weren't visible to me unless I leaned out the kitchen window and craned my neck. Lawn height no taller than 4 inches. I'd cut it last week, and if a blade wanted to sneak above regulation, I couldn't blame it. The soil here encouraged ambition. The memo about the special assessment sat on top of a thinner letter, same logo, different tone. Community update, it said. And in the second paragraph, there it was. It has come to our attention that certain households are not sharing equally in the responsibility of maintaining standards. I heard the ghost of a meeting room in that sentence, the scrape of folding chairs, someone clearing a throat into a microphone that wasn't working. A knock interrupted the fan's lazy rhythm. Not the door. The mailbox lid clapped shut again as if in protest. When I reached it, a small stack waited more notices, another friendly reminder, and a postcard saying the board valued my cooperation. Farther down the street, Karen's black SUV idled at the curb in front of Mrs. Landry's. The dachshund barked twice and got scooped up. Karen didn't look my way. She didn't have to. People look at the sun to know the temperature. They look at her to know the rules. Back in the study, I spread the HOA charter and the packet of covenants side by side. The paper edges made neat borders around my life. I turned pages, slowly tracing with my pencil as if the ink could be coaxed into honesty. Halfway through a section titled Jurisdiction and Enforcement, the font shrank a size. The kind of typographical whisper that hides bad news or inconvenient truth. The association shall exercise governance solely over properties incorporated into the Lakeside Estates Master Plan as of June 12, 1989. I didn't smile. Not yet. I just underlined the sentence once then, again the graphite leaving a darker road each time. Incorporated into the Master Plan. The words sat there compact as a locked gate. I leaned back and let my eyes wander to the file box I hadn't opened since the move. His handwriting was on the lid in a blue marker, Deeds and TD Keep. I'd avoided that box the way you avoid photographs until you're ready to be undone by them. I pulled it toward me anyway and lifted the lid. Old paper carries its own weather. The smell rose like a memory manila dry glue, a faint ghost of cigarette smoke from a decade when nobody minded. The first file was utilities, the second taxes. The third said simply, Parcel 07244. Inside, a yellowed deed with the county seal embossed and a date that made my chest change tempo. My uncle's name, then mine in the transfer paperwork. A notation in tidy clerk hand, the ink gone brown at the edges. Built 1971. Recorded prior to my pencil touched the margin, careful like it could bruise prior to June 12, 1989. Footsteps sounded on the gravel again. I stood still, listening. A flyer slid under the front door with a papery sigh. I waited until whoever delivered it had turned the corner before I picked it up. Community meeting, preserving our standards. The fonts were earnest. The bullet points promised a discussion of escalating non-compliance. The last line asked for neighbors' stories. On the back, in fine print, all assessments to be discussed reflect ongoing legal needs. Those legal needs had a way of sounding like mine. Midway through the afternoon, my phone buzzed with an email, courtesy reminder. The subject line wore its politeness like a too-tight collar. The body reminded me to remit fines promptly to avoid additional action. I replied with one line, "Please provide the recorded covenants showing jurisdiction over my parcel," and hit send. The message bounced back with a generic acknowledgement. "Thank you for contacting the board." No names, just a black banner with the association's crest. Faceless guardians of standards. I made more coffee. The second pot always tastes like insistence. I went back to the hard chair by the desk and read the clause again. Solely over Properties Incorporated. Solely. The word did heavy lifting. A shadow slipped across the study window, Frank's profile, I thought, from the set of the shoulders, but he kept walking. Hands sunk deep in his jacket. No wave. Not yet. People kept their courage in the same drawer as their fine china. I stacked the notices by category trash lawn mailbox, miscellaneous, then tucked the special assessment memo and the community meeting flyer on top like a flag I could point to later. I slid the deed into a plastic sleeve. Some things deserve armor. The light thinned and went gold. A heron took the slowest route across the water. I could feel the chair's old wood through my shirt, every groove carved by someone else's weight. On the wall, the clock ticked full of the patient kind of time that moves even when you're convinced it doesn't. I sharpened the pencil and drew a neat box around the line in the bylaws. The sound of the graphite on paper was louder than it should have been. I read the sentence aloud just to make it real in the room, real enough to push back against the notices and the whispered stories taking long walks past my house. The association shall exercise governance solely over properties incorporated into the Lakeside Estates Master Plan as of June 12, 1989. I touched the deed again, the pressed seal under my fingertips like a heartbeat. This land, I said to the empty study, isn't hers to claim. The lake answered with one small slap against the bank as if it agreed. Frank Delaney rested both arms on the weathered fence between our cabins, his breath fogging in the brittle air. The lake lay stiff and pewter, crusting at the edges where the wind cut sharp. He spoke low, as if the trees might overhear. "Karen crushes anyone who fights," he said. "Don't think you'll be different." The boards creaked under his weight, his shoulders stooped like he'd been carrying that warning for years. His gray hair stuck out under a wool cap and his eyes never quite lifted to mine. I set my gloved hands on the top rail, tried to meet him halfway. "Seems I've already got a target painted," I said. Frank exhaled through his nose a long whistle that froze before it could disappear. "You're not wrong." He nudged a boot against a patch of frost, grinding it into powder. "I've seen it. Folks who thought they could reason with her, or outlast her. They're gone." That morning had started crisp the cedar trees along the ridge, cutting the sky into tired blue ribbons. I'd been stacking wood when Frank appeared. We hadn't spoken more than neighborly nods before. Now his voice carried weight as if confession had been waiting for the right season. He looked back toward his house, paint-peeling birdbath crooked in the front yard. "See," that he asked, chin-jerking toward the stone bowl. "That birdbath cost me near 10 grand. I blinked. 10 grand violations. Hearings. Lawyer letters. He gave a bitter chuckle. Claimed it wasn't architecturally compatible. You ever seen a sparrow that cared about compatibility? The birdbath leaned a little green moss ringed the base. A crow dropped onto its edge, then left again unimpressed. Frank's laugh died fast. "She bled me slow," he went on. "Late fees appeals, court filings. I thought if I just paid it'd quiet down. But Karen doesn't quiet down. She circles, finds another hook. Pretty soon my wife was begging me to sell before we lost the house." He rubbed his hands together, knuckles swollen from cold or regret. "I stayed, but not whole. Not the same." The wind carried lake-scent cedar-sharp metallic. I tugged my scarf tighter. "Why, tell me this now?" "Because Frank said you're the first who's even tried to stand up. Most fold after the first volley. You've lasted months. That makes you dangerous. To her." He glanced over his shoulder again, voice dropping. "There are deeds, you know. Parcels older than her whole HOA charter. Folks with papers that don't bow to her bylaws. She hates those, hates them like a shadow she can't sweep away." My pulse ticked faster. Older deeds. "Cabins from before the '89 plan. Yours might be one." He shrugged, hunched deeper into his coat. "I don't know your paperwork, but I remember the way the survey lines cut. She got most, not all." The cedar fence between us seemed to tilt closer. His words lit a match in my head. Uncle's file box, the one labeled Deeds and Keedy Keep. The yellowed pages I'd touched but not studied. Frank's eyes clouded. I tried fighting her with common sense, with compromise. But compromise to Karen is just weakness in disguise. You'll need more than that. The crow cawed once from a limb overhead, then flew toward the gray water. "Why stay, Frank?" I asked. He scratched his chin, snow-dusted stubble falling like ash. "Because this is home, even when it feels like it isn't mine anymore." His gaze met mine, brief but steady. "Don't let her steal that from you." That night, the cold deepened the lake, groaning under thin ice. I shut the study door against the draft and pulled the lamp chain. Light pooled across the filing cabinet, dust dancing like it had been waiting. The top drawer stuck old metal resisting. I yanked until it gave with a metallic cough. Files spilled the smell of cedar smoke and glue. Utilities tax slips receipts so old the ink had faded to sepia. I found the folder again, Parcel 07244. My fingers shook as I eased it out, papers rustling like brittle leaves. The deed surfaced embossed seal, dated 1971, a generation before Karen's bylaws. My uncle's name etched in black mine beneath in the transfer. The county clerk's neat script confirmed what Frank had guessed. This cabin stood outside her web. The lamp glow caught the seal, casting a faint shine. It looked almost alive, pulsing under the paper's skin. I held it up, breath clouding in the cold air, and whispered to no one. Proof. By spring 2019, the sidewalks were littered with flyers. Taped to mailboxes, tucked under windshield wipers, stapled to posts, special HOA meeting, preserving our standards. The bold font warned of declining property values and urgent action. I carried my morning coffee outside and nearly tripped over a fresh steak in my yard. A neon red sign shouted, "Non-compliant property." Its metal legs wobbled in the damp earth, pointing my shame toward the street. Across the road, Claire clipped her roses too forcefully while her husband stared at the clouds. A jogger slowed, read the sign, and hurried on. Karen's black SUV idled down the lane, pearls at her throat flashing even from a distance. She didn't need to speak. Her presence was enough. By noon, the doorbell rang. A couple I barely knew stood close together as if bracing. "We've heard things," the woman said. "That you're not the owner," her husband added. "Karen says you're squatting in a dead man's cabin, that you refuse to pay dues." I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. "I live in the home my uncle left me. I pay what I owe to the county, not to her board." They looked unconvinced. "She says otherwise," the man muttered. "She says a lot," I replied. "Ask for the papers behind her words." Their eyes darted to the sign, then back to each other. They left without answering. On the sidewalk, they whispered, careful not to meet my gaze. That afternoon, a white pickup rolled up, HOA logo stamped on its doors. Two men in polos hopped out with clipboards. They prowled the yard like surveyors, nodding at the mailbox, the hedge, the trash enclosure. "You'll want to check your jurisdiction before trespassing," I called. They ignored me. One of them wandered onto the porch and put his hand on my uncle's wooden chair, the one that had carried my mornings since I moved in. He leaned his weight as if testing it. "Careful," I warned. "Out of spec," he muttered. "Doesn't match community aesthetic. We're not part of your community, not on paper." He twisted the chair anyway. The back leg split with a dry crack. The sound was small but final, like a bone snapping in private. Karen stepped from her SUV, phone raised. She smiled thinly as she filmed. "Documenting," she said. "For the record." "What record?" I asked. "The one that shows who cares about standards," she answered. "That chair, replace it or repair it. Assuming you plan to be compatible." The inspector scribbled non-compliant furnishing. I crouched beside the splintered wood. My palm traced the fracture, pale as bone, years of polish ruined by one careless shove. The break felt personal. Karen lowered her phone. "We'll review your case at the meeting," she called. "You should attend. The neighbors deserve to hear from you." "And from you," I said. She enjoyed that. They always do. Her SUV rolled off. The street exhaled lawnmower buzzing, wind chimes tinkling, the faint smell of barbecue smoke. Normal life tried to resume, but the red sign in my yard made sure it couldn't. I carried the broken chair inside, setting it gently on my workbench. The garage smelled of cedar and motor oil. The fracture was clean repairable. Wood remembers how to be whole if you help it. I wasn't ready to fix it yet, not while her phone still held its evidence. In my study, I pulled out the deed again. The embossed seal glowed under the lamp. The bylaws she quoted so freely used the word incorporated. My parcel never had been. I underlined it twice. The pencil groove deep enough to follow with a fingertip. A knock rattled the door. When I opened it, a teenager hammered the neon sign deeper into the soil, overseen by one of Karen's lieutenants. The boy looked embarrassed. The man smiled thinly. Just making sure it's visible." "It is," I said. Karen's SUV drifted past once more, slow as a parade float. A few neighbors clapped nervously, relieved to prove their allegiance. Inside, I stacked the paper's violation letters, assessment memos, flyers about standards. I placed the deed on top my hand, heavy on its plastic sleeve. Humiliation is heat. It burns through your good manners first, then hunts for fuel. I let it pass until what remained was cold and sharp. At dusk, the lake slapped softly at the stones. Wind pressed at the windows and withdrew. Somewhere a child whistled for a dog. I looked at the broken chair, at the sign in the yard, at the underlined clause. Then I said it aloud, just for the paper to hear. "Time, she learns who owns what." Saturday afternoon, the clubhouse filled like a courtroom. Folding chairs squeaked on the linoleum as neighbors shuffled in paper cups of weak coffee, trembling in their hands. A banner stretched across the front wall in bold blue letters, "Preserving Our Standards." Karen Carmichael stood beneath it, pearls flashing a polished gavel already in her grip. The room smelled of copier toner and instant brew, undercut by the faint mildew of old carpet. I slipped into the back, 2 folders pressed under my arm. One was slim worn at the edges, the other thick, brimming with letters and notices. My palms sweated through the cardstock, but I didn't loosen my hold. The murmurs shifted as Karen called the meeting to order. "We have pressing business today," she announced, her voice pitched high for the rafters. She lifted the gavel, struck the table crack, and the room fell silent. Neighbors leaned forward. Some I had known for years avoided my gaze, others whispered into their cups. Karen's smile widened. "The matter of Mr. Elias Harper, or, as the bylaws say, the tenant occupying Lot 17, a tenant who refuses his obligations." Her words landed like stones. She raised a stack of papers. Violation after violation, trash left visible mailbox at improper angle, grass exceeding 6 inches, and of course refusal to pay the special assessment. Such neglect threatens all of us. The board members nodded in rehearsed rhythm. Pens hovered. Karen turned toward me. "You sit in a cabin that was never properly incorporated. You enjoy our roads, our lake access, our amenities, yet you refuse to contribute." "What would you call that, neighbors?" a few voices muttered. "Freeloader. Parasite." My throat tightened. The thick folder seemed to weigh 100 pounds. I set it on the chair beside me. Then I carried the slim one forward, step by step. Karen arched a brow. "Do you have something to add?" "Mr. Harper?" I laid the folder on the table. Its flap opened with a whisper. A single document slid free, yellowed edges, embossed seal. "This," I said, my voice steady, though my hands shook, "is the deed to Lot 17, dated 1971, filed in Buncombe County. 10 years before your HOA charter. Its language is plain, not incorporated into any association." The room inhaled. Papers rustled. Karen's smile faltered, then returned sharper. "Old paperwork. Irrelevant. Our charter applies. I cut in only to properties incorporated under its covenant. Section 2, Article 3. I tapped the margin with my finger. Your jurisdiction ends at my boundary line." The gavel struck. Out of order, but the words were already out. Murmurs swelled, bouncing off the low ceiling. Neighbors craned for a glimpse of the seal, the signature. A man in the front row squinted. "That looks official." Karen's cheeks flushed. "He's twisting technicalities. Everyone knows." "Everyone knows what you tell them," I said quietly. I lifted the paper higher so the back rows could see. "But facts don't bend to your flyers. This land was never yours to govern." Gasps rippled like wind across water. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Is that true?" I let the silence stretch, then leaned in. "And Karen," my voice dropped almost conversational, "you may not even own your home." Her gavel froze midair. "What did you say she demanded?" I set the deed flat on the table, sliding it toward the board. My hand brushed the sweat-slick folder still under my arm, the thicker one, the one with records not yet shown. The neighbors leaned forward, waiting. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, merciless. I smiled thinly. "I'll explain. At the next session." The gavel cracked again, but the authority behind it sounded brittle. The gavel's echo still lingered when I laid down the thicker folder. The clubhouse had gone quiet again, the kind of silence that makes every shuffle of paper sound like thunder. I loosened the flap and drew out a stack of documents, Lisa's tax record stamped filings from the county office. They smelled faintly of old ink and mildew. I spread them across the folding table one by one, my hand steady now. This isn't about technicalities, I said. This is about ownership. Karen's eyes darted from page to page. She forced a laugh, brittle as glass. Irrelevant distractions. These meetings are for association business, not family clutter. A board member, Harold Dwyer, cleared his throat. His pen scratched nervously against his notepad, though he hadn't written a word. Beside him, Claire Weston shifted in her seat, whispering something too soft for Karen to catch. I tapped the top sheet. This lease is dated 1984. Renewal every decade. Filed against parcel 34. That parcel is the lot beneath your home, Karen. The air itself seemed to contract. Frank Delaney, hunched in the front row, straightened as if his spine had remembered its younger strength. Parcel 34, he murmured. That's Carmichael's address. Karen's hand tightened around the gavel. He lies. Fabrications forged. The fluorescent lights hummed. My throat felt dry, but the words came easier than I expected. It isn't forged. It's notarized. My uncle signed the first lease. My family trust still holds the land title. You've been paying token rent to a shell account all these years without realizing it. A murmur surged through the chairs. The sound was no longer whispers, but voices layered overlapping kayaks confiscated. Charged me for my bird feeder, made us repaint shutters twice. The clubhouse erupted with grievances long buried under fear. Karen banged the gavel. Crack, crack. The sound that once commanded obedience now bounced back hollow. No one hushed. She stood taller, pearls trembling on her collarbone. I am this community you will respect. No, I said, stepping closer, laying the final sheet flat in front of her. The county seal glinted. You're my tenant, Karen, which makes me... I let the words hang, then finished your landlord. Gasps cut the air. For a heartbeat, even the buzzing lights seemed to falter. Karen's face blanched, then flushed crimson. Her hand wavered midair. The gavel slipped clattering to the table. Neighbors rose from their seats, some clapping hesitantly at first, then with growing rhythm. Frank joined his palms thin but steady. Claire and Harold glanced at each other, then lifted their hands too. The sound swelled into applause, rolling across the room like a tide. For the first time in years, the HOA grip cracked. Karen's mouth twisted. She gathered her notes with shaking fingers, pages sliding crooked. You think this is finished? She hissed. I'll bury you in Court Harper. You'll regret this, her chair screeched as she pushed back. She stormed down the aisle, heels striking like gunshots on tile, though no weapon was in sight, only fury and panic. The door slammed so hard the banner overhead shivered. Applause rose again, louder, spilling into laughter, relief, disbelief. Someone shouted, "About time." Another. "We're free of her." I stood among them, the deed and leases spread like cards in a winning hand. My knees trembled, but I kept my chin steady. For once I wasn't the man whispered about as a squatter. I was the man who had pulled the curtain back. The board members shuffled papers, embarrassed, exposed. Harold finally spoke, voice thin. Perhaps it's time we reconsider how this association conducts itself. Cheers answered him. Frank's eyes met mine, watery but alight. He mouthed a simple word across the distance, finally. The morning sky hung low and gray as I crossed the steps of the Buncombe County Courthouse. The stone facade glistened from a night's drizzle, and each step echoed heavier than the last. Behind me, neighbors filed in quietly, their coats buttoned against the damp air. Frank walked closest, clutching a large envelope, his eyes catching mine with a faint nod. That single gesture carried more steadiness than any speech. Inside, the corridors smelled faintly of polish and old paper. The fluorescent buzz overhead followed us into the courtroom, where rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of half the community. I took my seat at the defendant's table, arranging my folders in neat stacks. My fingers lingered on the slim one with deeds, then the thicker one with minutes, invoices, certified letters, my lifelines. Karen swept in moments later, flanked by two attorneys in dark suits. Pearls at her throat gleamed against the gray light filtering through high windows. She carried herself as if the outcome was already hers, her heels clicking brisk authority. "All rise," the bailiff intoned. The judge entered, robes trailing expression unreadable. We sat as the gavel struck once. Karen's attorney rose first, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, we are dealing with a man who has lived unlawfully, refusing to comply with community standards. He is not an owner, but a tenant, squatting in property subject to our client's HOA." His words sliced clean, practiced for effect. A few whispers rustled among the benches. I stood slowly when it was my turn buttoning my jacket, though my palms dampened it instantly. Your Honor, I am not a squatter. I am the heir to this land protected by a deed predating the HOA itself, and more than that, I have evidence that the actions against me were retaliation, not governance. From the folder I pulled the first exhibit certified letters, each stamped with bold dates. I laid them on the table, one after another. The clerk gathered them, passing copies up to the judge. The sound of the rubber stamp thudding as exhibits were logged steadied my nerves. Next came invoices, fees for violations like mailbox angle and grass length. Then HOA meeting minutes where Karen's own words lingered in neat type. We need to pressure Harper to leave. Karen's face tightened. Her attorney objected, but the judge waved it down, eyes narrowing at the text. Then Frank was called. He shuffled forward, shoulders stooped but voice clear. He held his envelope as though it were armor. I lived through this too, he began. Karen fined me for a bird bath. She spread rumors until my wife begged we move. I lost thousands. But Elias, he fought, and I've seen the papers myself. His land isn't under the HOA. Karen knew it. His voice never wavered, though his hands trembled slightly on the rail. The judge listened without interrupting, pen scratching steadily. When Frank finished, a hush lingered, broken only by the shuffle of papers. Karen's attorney tried to regain ground, but the tide had shifted. My calm delivery, the stack of artifacts, Frank's testimony, they formed a wall. Finally, the judge leaned back, fingers steepled. His voice carried the weight of finality. This case is not only without merit, it illustrates a troubling misuse of authority. The deed stands. The HOA exceeded its jurisdiction. The complaint is dismissed. The gavel struck sharp, decisive. A breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding escaped me. The benches behind rippled with soft cheers, suppressed but unmistakable. Sweat cooled against my temples. Across the aisle, Karen sat rigid, her face drained to chalk. Outside, the courthouse steps gleamed under a brief patch of sun breaking through clouds. Neighbors clustered around me, their words a blur of relief and congratulations. Frank's hand landed firm on my shoulder. Told you, truth would stand, he said simply. Karen descended last alone, now her heels faltering. She brushed past, pausing just close enough for her whisper to reach. This isn't over, but her hands shook as she tightened her coat, and for once her threat felt hollow. The cul-de-sac felt different that summer. Karen's SUV was gone, her windows dark, and the for sale sign at the edge of her lawn groaned in the breeze. Each creak of its metal post seemed to mark the end of her reign more than any judge's order ever could. The lake shimmered, catching the light of paper lanterns strung from porch to porch. Smoke drifted from half a dozen grills, sweet with hickory and sauce. Kids biked in figure eights on the pavement, their laughter rising like a sound we'd all forgotten the neighborhood could make. The clubhouse banner, no longer proclaiming preserving our standards, had been rolled away. Tonight, folding tables held potato salad, baked beans, and coolers packed with ice. Frank raised his paper cup toward me. To fresh air, he said, his grin wide enough to erase years of wear. Claire and Harold clinked cups with him, their grandchildren darting between us, sticky with barbecue sauce. I eased into the wooden chair on my porch, the same one my uncle left me. Its joints no longer splintered. A careful patch of golden glue held the arm steady, and fresh varnish gave it a quiet sheen. When I leaned back, the chair groaned not in protest, but in welcome. Coffee steamed gently in my mug, warm for once, instead of bitter. The mood was lighter, but business lingered under the laughter. On the folding table beside the grill lay a stack of papers, a petition, neat signatures in blue ink. Frank had spent weeks organizing it, knocking on doors, listening to stories of fines for bird baths, swings, and paint shades one tone too bright. Now, neighbors took turns adding their names. We'll audit every dollar spent, Harold said, pen scratching. No more special assessments without proof. And bylaws, Claire added, her glasses sliding down her nose. We amend them, limit terms, require open meetings. The crowd murmured in agreement. What once had been whispered in fear now came freely, even cheerfully. I watched from my chair, letting their voices wash over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the subject of gossip, but part of a gathering. The lake breeze brought the smell of burgers and coleslaw, children's laughter braided with the crackle of wood in fire pits. Someone suggested forming an interim committee until elections could be held. Frank waved his hand. Elias should sit on it. I shook my head, smiling. I've had my share of meetings and minutes. Let me keep the coffee warm. They laughed, but I saw gratitude in their eyes. They didn't need a hero with speeches. They needed one more set of steady shoulders nearby. Later, as dusk settled and lightning bugs flickered, the vote was held. Hands raised one by one, a sea of agreement beneath string lights. An interim committee with authority to open the books and amend bylaws passed unanimously. The same neighbors who once shut curtains when I walked by now clapped each other on the back, relief showing in every gesture. Frank slid onto the porch beside me, his chair creaking under his weight. "Didn't think I'd live to see this," he said. His voice softened. "Took guts to stand up to her." I swirled the coffee in my mug, watching the ripples fade. "My uncle once told me not to let anyone take what was ours. I just finally believed him." The words lingered, folding into the chorus of voices across the lawn. I glanced again at the for sale sign, its panels rattling faintly in the night air. Soon, another family would move in, perhaps with less fear, perhaps with children who'd ride their bikes down to the dock without worry of a notice slipped under the door. The lake caught the last blush of sunset. I leaned back, the repaired chair steady under me, and listened. The gavel strikes the whispered threats, the years of paper storms they felt distant now replaced by the murmur of neighbors planning bake sales, fundraisers, and even a community garden where the abandoned tennis court stood. The chair creaked softly as I shifted, not from strain, but as if reminding me it still had years left. The lake stayed calm, mirroring the lanterns strung along the shore. For the first time since Karen's hammering knock, I breathed without weight. A quiet hero, some might say, but I only felt like a man who had kept his seat and in doing so helped everyone else find theirs again. The chair creaks steady beneath me, no longer cracked but whole again as the lake gathers the evening light. Smoke from the grills drifts soft across the yard, mixing with laughter that used to be whispers. We voted, rewrote the rules, and left the clubhouse door open, proof that paper power can be undone when neighbors lean closer. Justice isn't loud. It moves in steady steps like a hand on a shoulder or a stitch drawn neat. For anyone staring down, notices and gossip know this patience facts, and company can shift the ground. Where has your street found its voice when the bylaws felt heavier than the people